All right, gang. So, as you may or may not have seen, METR or Meter released their latest data after Claude Opus came out, and it was a little bit surprising. So, the rate of acceleration of machine autonomy is actually continuing to accelerate above and beyond what I documented just a couple months ago in August. So, without further ado, I want to get into kind of this sci-fi scenario. So, this new Moore's law is governing the future, and rather than a stretched super exponential or a stretched exponential, the present best fit is a log quadratic curve, which is basically goes vertical. And so here's what the numbers showed as after I crunched all of the latest data from Meter. So by 2032, a single AI task will equal 1,212 years of human work at the current rate of acceleration. So by the beginning of 2026, the average is about 3 hours. By the beginning of 2028, it's at 8 days worth of autonomous work. 2030 is 41 months. 2031 is 58 years, and 2032 is over a millennia. Now, one thing that I need to clarify is this is not clock time. The way that this data is created is Meter looks at how long would it have taken a human to do that task on their own versus what is the agent's actual success rate. The AI agents often do things much faster. So for instance, coding up a web front end feature might take a human 3 hours, but Claude can do it in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. So we're getting a time compression as well. So when we say that it does 1,200 years autonomously, it's not that it's running for 1,200 years straight. It's that it would do something that it would take a human 1,200 years to do, which is basically rederiving all of modern physics. So intelligence immediately then confronts a finite world. An AI that can solve all of those things, like solving physics from first principles, means that it's going to be constrained by something. And so that's going to be energy, the time step of industry. It takes time to forge metals and build things and move atoms around. And then, of course, the material limits of a closed system, namely the thermodynamic limits and the limits of gravity on planet Earth. So that is kind of the premise. This is where I want to jump off into sci-fi predictions, and this is where I'm just going to have fun with it, because here's the thing. As I was doing this research, I was like, wow, what does it actually mean to have an AI that becomes that autonomous? Because also in that same amount of time, those AIs are going to get a lot smarter. So the first thing that I came up with was the inverse trantor. A lot of people are like, oh, we need to build a Dyson sphere and we need to harvest all of the energy from Earth. And it's like, but that would be really ugly. And then it occurred to me, one of the primary constraints is energy. Well, that thermodynamic limit constraint goes away if you start building a Dyson swarm or something like that, and then you move literally all of industry off of Earth. So you move the data centers, you move the farming, you move the metallurgy, you move all the manufacturing, you move all the stuff that's going to be autonomous anyways because humans don't need to be there. So you build gigantic satellites on Lagrange points that serve as our data centers, that serve as, whatever else that we need. And then we rewild Earth. So this is the first thing that I was like, whoa, this is possible. And people are talking about building data centers in space already. In the long run, this makes so much more sense. Now, the one constraint, though, is latency. If you need fast stuff, you don't want a data center at a Lagrange point that's going to take, minutes for the signal to get back here. You're going to want some data centers closer to space for the low latency access stuff. But for the heavy lifting, for the deep model runs, for training gigantic models, put those way out past the moon. Who cares? So the biggest insight that where I started with was, okay, what mathematically makes the most sense is offloading entropy. And the reason that this makes sense in the future is because the background radiation of space is the perfect heat sink for waste heat and waste entropy. So then Earth just becomes a green ball again. And there's so many lifestyles that can come from that. So when we look at the actual thermodynamics of human experience, the human body only requires about 100 watts. So this is basically saying, okay, well, if energy is the constraint rather than intelligence, what does that even look like? So a high-end lifestyle today requires about 10 kilowatts. So that's 10 kilowatts constantly. Whereas, your home uses a few hundred to maybe 1,000 during heavy uses. If you're an ultra billionaire, then it might be like 100 kilowatts. That's still a minuscule fraction of the total amount of energy available to us if we build a Dyson swarm or something like that. If we could harvest just 0.01% of the sun's total energy, it would be functionally infinite for every single human. So then the question shifts from, okay, intelligence isn't a bottleneck, energy isn't a bottleneck, then your creativity is a bottleneck. That's the only bottleneck in this future. So that is, there's basically kind of two ways to look at this in terms of first principles. Number one is human attention. Even if your personal AI can generate, 10 million movies as compelling as Lord of the Rings or whatever per day, you're not going to be able to watch all of them. So your attention is ultra scarce unless you plug into, Neuralink version 12 or whatever. And of course, if we have that much intelligence, we can. And then you can just download every experience. That's not outside of the realm of possibility, but I don't know if I want to just be wire-headed and downloading, 8 million versions of Avatar and The Matrix and watching those and just living in simulated nostalgia. I want to stay in the real world. Another limitation is Dunbar's number, which is that the human brain can only keep track of about 150 high-quality human relationships. So therefore, we're really looking at, intelligence, not a bottleneck, energy, not a bottleneck. So then it becomes, how do you want to live on a day-to-day basis? So beyond that, when we look at the more philosophical side of humanity, which philosophy is still anchored in our biology, there are three basic drives that I think that are kind of driving our brains. And so number one is status. We are social chimps first and foremost. We all want status. And even if we all ascend up the Kardashev scale and we have access to functionally infinite energy and infinite information, there's still things like positional goods, and we want something just because someone else has it. Then there is curiosity, which is novelty. Curiosity is literally just novelty applied rigorously. And novelty seeking is a trait of intelligent species, where it's saying, hey, I don't know what that is. When you recognize that there's a gap, you have a instinct to lower that surprise in the future, which is, the principle of free energy. So if you are surprised, then you want to reduce that surprise in the future, which translates to curiosity. And then finally, struggle. Struggle is hormesis. So that is mental hormesis, which is pushing yourself beyond what you can mentally do, and physical hormesis, which is pushing your body. This is why we play challenging video games. This is why we do marathons and those sorts of things. We have an instinct to keep our bodies and minds in motion. All of these are biologically grounded, but they also have a philosophical component. And so I call these the three generator functions of the human condition. Now, if we have superintelligence that has an IQ of 1 billion and it's helping manage the planet from orbit, then that becomes a zookeeper. So perfection is a prison. The need for struggle is about agency. If an autonomous AI infrastructure manages our world perfectly, preventing all disasters, solving all conflicts, meeting all needs, it effectively becomes a zookeeper. Even if the enclosure is a planetary paradise, the knowledge that we are no longer in control, that we can't truly fail, creates a spiritual claustrophobia. True fulfillment requires the possibility of independent victory, which requires risk and real defeat. So when I looked at those generator functions of humanity and I said, okay, many people are going to be perfectly content to live on resort Earth. Because basically under this future, the combination of superintelligence and offloading entropy into the ether, Earth is just going to be a resort for everyone. It's going to be a paradise. It's a return to the Garden of Eden by putting data centers in space. Yes, I went there. Some people will be perfectly content with that. Some people will not. So, status, the unsolvable scarcity. The need for status persists because human desire is mimetic. We want things because other people want them. This creates conflict even amidst abundance. Two forms of scarcity will remain. This is kind of looking at it at a structural level. There's plenty of ways that it can express within these two structures. So number one is positional scarcity. We can create infinite replicas of a beach house, but we cannot replicate the single best beachfront location in Malibu. Number two is social scarcity. Influence, reputation, and leadership remain zero-sum. We will manufacture new hierarchies just to have a game to play. This is just human nature. The more that chimp A has, if they have more banana, I want banana. If chimp B gets more banana than me, then I feel bad because I want more banana. That's just how our brains work. Our brains are highly relativistic. So it's who's having the best experiences, who has the most stuff, who has the most friends, those sorts of things. So that is a constant generator function. It can never be satisfied, which is the reason that I think that even in this hypothetical future, we're going to keep going. We're going to just keep finding stuff to compete about. It's an infinite game. It's game B. There is no winner. The game just keeps playing, and the goal is for the game to keep going. Next is curiosity, the engine of divergence. The need for curiosity is the ultimate escape valve for a perfected world. For some, a safe, stable, beautiful Earth is not an endpoint, but a perfectly engineered launch pad. This drive to know what lies beyond the horizon, to answer questions an AI cannot answer for us because we haven't thought to ask them yet, will be the catalyst for humanity's expansion beyond the cradle. Space is really big. That's all there is to it. There's a lot out there to explore. The machines will probably precede us, but you know what? Earth is Earth. And if you have a couple centuries to explore all of Earth and have all the vacations that you want and all the cool experiences on Earth, you'll probably get bored eventually, unless you can reset your brain. And if you have a lot of implants, you can say like, hey, new game plus, where it's like, let me just restart my life as if I'm doing everything for the first time by erasing the right set of neurons, and everything will feel fresh and novel. But that's kind of like a cyclical hell. That would be a deeply philosophical hell. So instead, you might say, let me go to Mars. Mars is an unconquered challenge. Let me go help colonize Mars. Let me get on a sleeper ship and help colonize Proxima Centauri. Something like that. So then, on a practical level, what are some of the lifestyles that can come from this? So first is, let's just talk through a philosophical speciation, choosing a future. Faced with a world without limits, humanity will not choose one path, but three. And this is kind of three overarching paths. There's going to be more paths, but it basically comes down to where do you live? These are not different careers. They're divergent species of civilization, each organized around satisfying the generator functions in a unique way. The future humanity is not a single city on a hill, but a diaspora of meaning. So first is the terran preservationists. These are the people that are just going to stay in their bodies. They're going to stay on Earth, and they're going to enjoy life on Earth in a perfect Eden. Next is the solar industrialists. So these are the people that stay in the solar system, but work on building and new challenges and that sort of thing. And then there's the people that build a star cruiser and then YOLO off into the cosmos. That would be me because I'm that level of autistic. So let's explore these. Path 1, the terran preservationists. Their philosophy is basically biological authenticity. They view Earth not as a starting point, but the destination. Lifestyle, they live in human-scale communities on a rewilded planet, there we go, supported by invisible orbital industry. They use longevity tech, but reject radical enhancement, valuing the raw human experience. How they find meaning. Struggle through artificial but meaningful challenges like competitive sport, art, and craftsmanship. Even if AI can do everything, you can still practice being a painter or building boats and that sort of thing, and that can be your status game, particularly if you live in a seaside village of 150 of your closest friends. Status through stewardship of the earth, philosophical debate, and deep community relationships. From a first principles biological perspective, that is more than enough for most humans to find their life meaningful and satisfying. Curiosity through exploring the depths of human consciousness and the complexities of a restored biosphere. They would go out swimming, they would have psychedelic rituals, they would have song and dance rituals, and those sorts of things. That would be kind of their stasis, their status quo. Now, this is a return to Eden model. And of course, as they become, kind of acclimated to this, some people might get bored and wander off. Some people will probably do this for 5 years, 10 years, however long. But then eventually, I think some people will get bored and peel off. Now, path 2, the solar industrialist. Philosophy, conquest through creation. They believe meaning is found in building grand structures and taming harsh environments. Lifestyle. They inhabit Martian dome cities, O'Neill cylinders, and orbital shipyards. They embrace transhuman light augmentations, neural links for drone control, exoskeletons for vacuum work, but remain tied to the cultural hub of Sol. They stay in the solar system because they're still intrinsically social. They say, okay, I want to stay with humanity. Humanity is the spark of life and intelligence. And I'm a social species. The loneliness of the void is just too much. So they stay here for the foreseeable future. The struggle, how they find meaning. the real high-stakes engineering challenges of terraforming planets and constructing megastructures. Of course, the AI is going to be helping with this, but remember, AI is just intelligence hyperabundance, and it's going to help us get things like energy hyperabundance, but things still move at clock speed. It still takes time for orbital trajectories, it still takes time for alloys to cool, and that sort of thing. Status, derived from scale and complexity of what they build. They are the master engineers of the system. Curiosity in material science, applied physics, and the exploration of our solar neighborhood. Basically, can I go build that? Can I build a bigger Dyson swarm? How can I build a better dome on Mars and that sort of thing? And by the way, the pace of this is insane. When you realize that a single AI chip in 10 years is going to be able to basically reverse engineer every thought that humans have had and that's been stored on the internet in a few minutes, and then add to that, that's like, it's really difficult to really wrap your head around the scale of this. And then the only limitation just becomes how fast can we accumulate a Dyson swarm so that we can control many, many terawatts and petawatts and yotawatts of energy. And once we get to that scale, then it's like you're cranking out a new O'Neill cylinder every like 4 minutes. I mean, some of this is a little hyperbolic. Obviously, this is very much of a jumping off into sci-fi, but like, it's also not that far out of the realm of possibility. So then, path 3, the galactic divergence. Philosophy, meaning through disconnection. They believe the ultimate act of self-actualization is to become the founder of a new independent civilization. They travel in Manhattan-sized vessels or Dunbar arcs, self-sufficient city-states journeying to other stars. Severed from Earth by light lag, they are free to rewrite the definition of human, embracing radical genetic and cybernetic evolution to adapt to new worlds. The struggle, the existential weight of solitude, and the immense responsibility of building a world from scratch. Status. The ultimate status is to become an ancestor, a founder of a completely new branch of intelligent life. Curiosity. The infinite unknown of the galaxy is their playground. This is basically inevitable, because when you look at the numbers of what we're going to be able to do, so machine intelligence super explosion comes first, assuming that we don't have some sort of mathematical bounding constraint, which so far doesn't seem like there is one. If anything, it keeps accelerating, because whenever I've run these numbers, here, let me show you in a second. Whenever I've run these numbers in the past, whenever I've run these numbers in the past, every time we get new data, this model gets updated. So last time I ran these numbers, we were not at 1,200 years of autonomy by 2032. It was, I don't remember what it was, but it wasn't that high. I did a side-by-side comparison. So the mathematical constraints simply just don't seem to exist. And then once we get to this point where we have, let me get back to it. Once we get to the point where we have that much intelligence, that allows us to solve material science and engineering problems. So then we can start exponentially building our power base, literally our energy base, with essentially building a Dyson swarm and self-replicating robots. Because again, if you have that much intelligence and that much autonomy, you put it in robots and you launch the robots up to asteroids and other planets, and you start building more. So the von Neumann probes are going to be realized within a decade or two, at least in principle. So then you say, okay, well, what is our energy budget per individual? What is our cognitive budget per individual human? In 10 to 20 years, your personal energy budget is going to be measured in the gigawatts. And I'm not being hyperbolic. It's going to be measured in the gigawatts per individual. It might take 2 or 3 or 4 decades, but the energy budget per individual human is going to go completely vertical. I promise you. Like, that seems inevitable when you run these numbers. And then of course your cognitive budget also goes through the roof long before then, because of thermodynamic computing and photonic computing and ongoing efficiency gains, basically computronium, where, the substrate of matter itself becomes computational, which, by the way, if you haven't been following thermodynamic computing, that is basically computronium. You use ambient thermodynamic entropy to do high-powered calculations on artificial intelligence. That is computronium. It has been invented. So then, with all that being said, then anything that's an information problem is no longer a problem. You say, let's simulate 1 billion years of human evolution on, another planet. Great. You can simulate that evolution in a few minutes or a few hours. And then you say, okay, let me start changing my body so that I can live on that planet by the time that we get there. that sort of thing. And then if like with the limitation of physics, you end up with what we might call like hyper simulations, where a simulation can only ever approximate reality. But if you have that much additional computational power, then you can do something that is good enough and often better than what you can do in the lab. And so then you calculate exactly how your body should be, what genes need to be where, and those sorts of things, or, cybernetic implants. And then you just build the thing. So you test it, 8 ways from Sunday in virtual, and then you build the thing and then off to the races. So that is where we're going. And I know that this video probably sounds breathless and crazy, but it was so much fun to make this. So the purpose of a god is to create a universe. The log quadratic curve does not lead to a single destiny. It leads to a tool set so powerful that each individual and each group can choose their own. The future of humanity is not to settle a single utopia, but to become a dandelion in the cosmic wind, each seed a different answer to the question of what we are here for. Our most fundamental drives for struggle, status, and discovery are not flaws to be engineered away, but they are the very engines that will seed the galaxy. So those generator functions will push us off this planet, and they will push us into the deepest of space. And while AI and superintelligence might precede us, that is your individual kind of destiny. The future is far, far weirder than you could possibly imagine right now. These are just a few possibilities that I was riffing on. All right, thanks for watching. Cheers.